Okay, chapter 4, circumstance which aggravate criminal liability. When you say aggravate, ipasamot, ipa-heighten ang iwang criminal liability because these circumstances are present. The following are your aggravating circumstances. There are 21 provisions, but in actuality, there are more than that because, for example, in number 7, if you commit a crime on the occasion of a conflagration, shipwreck, earthquake, epidemic, or other calamity or misfortune. So that's another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, ana. So, the implication, ani, there are a lot of ways in committing sins or evil, di ba? Kumpara mo sa justifying circumstance. Yung sa justifying circumstance or exempting circumstance, gamay lang yun ang mga butan sa dili sa kalibutan, whereas aggravating, there are a lot of ways of committing a sin or a crime or ways of putting you down into hell. Anyway, it's everything under aggravating circumstance may be found under Article 14. That's up to number 21. We'll only discuss up to number 12 today. Right, so aggravating circumstance. These circumstances which, if attending the commission of a felony, would tend to increase the prescribed penalty to the maximum period of the prescribed penalty. So for example, you committed the crime of homicide, and then the attendant aggravating circumstance is that you did it at night in order to ensure impunity, para ma-make sure you di mo na ma-carry out di mo ang imuhang evil intent. So you are now given with the penalty of 12 years, 1 day, and 20 years. So mo na yung entire period. But if we were to break down that into 3, ang minimum sentence is 12 years, 1 day to 14 years, ang mid kay 14 years to 17 years, and ang maximum is ang 17 years to 20 years. So normally, if you commit the crime of homicide, tapos walay attendant na any circumstances present, whether it be justifying, exempting, mitigating, or aggravating, usually ang ginapataw sa imuha na penalty is the middle one, which is the 14 years and 1 day to 17 years. Now, considering na, let's say, it's a problem na you committed homicide at night time, kasi mo nang gigamit, nighttime man good is an aggravating circumstance. So once this is found in the allegations, in the information, or sa facts sa imuhang kaso, then instead of 14 years and 17 years ang penalty, if found guilty, you will be your penalty will be 17 years and 1 day to 20 years. So ingana ka delikado ang aggravating circumstance. So what is the reason nga nung aggravating circumstances tend to increase the maximum period of the prescribed penalty? Because the offender has shown a greater perversity or moral depravity as manifested by the following. When you say perverse, ang ilang ka evil, ilang ka how flirty they are when it comes to playing danger and evil ba. Tapos they are deprived from being morally good. So mauna, ginapunish yun maayo ang mga individuals who perform crimes attendant with aggravating circumstance. So reason kay tungod sa commission at the time of the commission of the crime, at the place of the commission of the crime, let's say gusto yun nimo rape po ning babae dito sa lugar na wag gyud katao-tao ka na wag di siya maka shout for help because it is abandoned. So mo na gina-consider ang place of commission of the crime. Third, the ways and means employed or involved in the commission of the crime. Let's say you used fire, you used poison in order to kill, to make sure that your opponents are killed. Fourth, the motive or motivation behind the crime, or perhaps because of the personal background of the offender and the offended party. So mo yung mga reasons as to why we tend to punish them more. There are several kinds of aggravating circumstance. Now, when you say generic aggravating circumstance, mo ni sila katong if attendant may increase ang imuhang penalty. So generally applicable to all crimes. When you say specific aggravating circumstance, they will only apply to certain specific crimes, such as ignominy in crimes against chastity or treachery in crimes against persons. Now, when you say qualifying aggravating circumstance, this will change the nature of the crime. So, for example, if treachery and evident premeditation is found in homicide, your homicide becomes murder. So, mo na difference between homicide and murder. In homicide, there is no qualifying aggravating circumstance. But in murder, there is a qualifying aggravating circumstance. So, you killed, in homicide man good, di ba? The elements are almost the same with murder. But the difference is that in murder, you have a qualifying aggravating circumstance. When you say evident premeditation, pinagplanuhan mo na mabuti para lang patayin siya. When you say treachery, you acted so swiftly as to make sure that you will really kill that individual without that individual having to defend himself. So, imo na siya ang treachery. Treacherous, imo pagpatay sa imuhang victim. Lastly, you have your inherent aggravating circumstance. Those which necessarily accompany the commission of the crime. These are circumstances which by nature of the crime committed becomes specific element thereof. So, pag present ang inherent aggravating circumstance, they will not increase your penalty because it is already part of the element of the crime, such as in robbery with force upon things. Ang breaking of the roof is aggravating, but di ba in robbery, when you want to rob a store, you need to break something, right? So that's why it's already part of its element. So mo nagitawag inherent na siya, the aggravating circumstance. Now, let's discuss each one by one, all of the, up to number 12 karon kay dito makaya. The aggravating circumstances found under Article 14. That advantage be taken by the offender of his public position. So the requisites are that the offender is a public officer, and second, the commission of the crime would not have been possible without the powers, resources, and influence of the office he holds. An example of that is that here, Patrolman Yul arrested Mirna, a sidewalk vendor, for selling her wares without a necessary permit. So Patrolman Yul invited her to go with him to the police station. Instead of going to the police station, Patrolman Yul brought the lady to a secluded place and there subsequently raped her. Rape here was committed by Patrolman Yul by taking advantage of his official position, which is an aggravating circumstance. So that advantage be taken by the offender of his public position. Sa pa, na nangongotong na that advantage be taken by the offender his public position. Diba? Nangongotong ng mga police. So that is an aggravating circumstance. Naipakutala. Anyway. Class, naipakutala.
Wala, sir.
Wala. Alright. Second, that the crime be committed in contempt or insult to public authorities. Meaning you committed a crime in front or to insult individuals who are clothed with public authority. So the requisites for that are the following. That public authority is engaged in the exercise of public function, and the offender committed the crime despite of his presence, showing lack of respect for public authorities. Please take note that a public authority is a person in authority. So you already know that by virtue of Article 152 of the Revised Penal Code, di ba? When it comes to voluntary surrender, in order for you to be validly raise the defense of voluntary surrender, you have to surrender to a person in authority. So you already know who these individuals are. Now, an example is A and B are quarreling. Nag-away sila. The municipal mayor who passed by attempts to separate them to stop the quarrel. Notwithstanding the intervention of the mayor, A and B still continued to quarrel and succeeded in killing B. In this case, A commits the crime of homicide with the aggravating circumstance of with insult to public authority. Naghimo kang crime sa atubangan sa isa ka public authority. Wala siya. In contempt or insult. Next, that the act be committed with insult or in disregard of the respect due to the offended party on account of his rank, age, or sex, or that is be committed in the dwelling of the offended party if the latter has not given any provocation. So the requisites of disregard of rank, age, or sex are the following: that the crime must be against the victim's person or his honor, that there is deliberate intent to offend or insult the respect due to the victim's rank, age, or sex. So an example of these are, as found by the Supreme Court, there is disregard of sex when the blouse of the victim in murder is needlessly removed. Why? Diba? When you murder or when you commit murder, all you have to do is just kill the individual. Why do you need to remove the blouse of the victim, of the woman's blouse, diba? So that is already a disregard of sex or disregard for the female. Zapa, there is disregard of age when the victim of murder is a child of tender age or an octogenarian. Let's say you're a full-grown 29-year-old man and ipatay kag 2 years old na bata or 89 years old na tiguwang. See, there is disregard of age. Anong patyon man mo ng mga musmus na bata or kaning old man? So pa, there is disregard of rank when a judge is killed by an ordinary citizen. Disregard of rank ni siya because a judge is supposed to be seen as a public authority worthy of to be looked at. Nga, gipatay lang nimo. So sayang, di ba? Sayang ang iyang ranggo as a judge. So mao ni ang mga ways and means of committing a crime under this paragraph. And lastly, we have here dwelling. What if you committed a crime inside a dwelling? When you say dwelling, kanang balay, whether it be a condominium, whether it be boarding house nimo, whether it be kanang bed spacer ka, for as long as you feel safe inside that house or home, nang dwelling na siya. So the requisites of dwelling are the crime occurred inside the dwelling of the victim, and there is no provocation on the part of the victim, and the offender committed the crime in disregard of the respect which the dwelling is entitled. So in People versus Galapia, the Supreme Court said that it is not necessary that the victim owns the place where he lives or dwells. The place is considered as his home, which the law seeks to protect or uphold, whether he be a lessee, a boarder, or a bed spacer. It is aggravating, although the victim was staying there temporarily in order to escape the brutalities of the appellant because of jealousy. There was even one case wherein the victim was inside the house, his very own home, but he was shot. He was shot from a distance. The Supreme Court said we should appreciate the aggravating circumstance of dwelling because although the accused was outside of the house, but the mere fact na ang victim sulod because he wants to be feel protected under his home and that was where he was killed, we should appreciate the aggravating circumstance of dwelling as against the accused. Sumoto. Sniper man siya from the balay. Di ba ikaw, pag ganahan ka, mas sniper sa imong balay, kay feel unta nimo at safe ka dira sa imong balay, igo na kay sniper, na headshot pagid ka, di ba? So that's why dwelling was appreciated in that situation. What if veranda ka gipatay? Is that considered as dwelling or not?
Sir?
Veranda.
Miranda.
Do you know what a veranda is?
Wala, sir.
Kanang sa inyong balay ko, di ba? Kanang before mo sulod sa balay, na ay murag welcome area, diha na open space, usay na lingkuranan, veranda.
Ay, oh,
Balcon, sir.
Ha?
balcon.
Oh, balkon kana, balkon sa tuwa balkon kana.
Kuan, sir? Oo, sir. Dwelling
Ah.
gyapon, sir.
Yes, because it's still part of the house.
Part gyapon.
That is one case also as decided by the Supreme Court. Okay, let's move on. That the act be committed with abuse of confidence or obvious ungratefulness. So, ikaw, you acted, committed a crime, and this crime is coupled with abuse of confidence and obvious ungratefulness, ingrata. Now, what are the requisites of duha ni siya kaunsahan, duha ni siya aggravating circumstance? It's abuse of confidence and obvious ungratefulness. Now, for abuse of confidence to be present, the following elements must be present. That the offended party has trusted the offender, that the offender abused such trust, and the abuse of confidence facilitated the commission of the crime. So, trust ha, kanang pagsalig, dili kay trust, kung makita ninyo sa 7-Eleven. So, this was applied in the case of People versus Laura, where kasambahay killed the child entrusted to her care and custody. So the killing of the child was considered as aggravated by abuse of confidence on the part of the offender. Remember, ang kasambahay is an individual to whom we share our trust with. Now, if that kasambahay destroys that trust, then there is abuse of confidence should he or she perform a crime inside your home. What else? For obvious ungratefulness, the following requisites must be present. Ungratefulness must be obvious, and that is, there must be something which the offender owes the victim. Utang na loob. Now, how do you exemplify this? For example, you take somebody inside your home. You pity him because he is homeless. He does not have any place to go and he is starving and he is cold out in the open. Now you took pity on him. And when you wake up one morning, yung mga appliances nangawala na. Yung TV, yung flat screen, yung touch screen, yung ref, nangawala na. So what kind of a man is that? Diba? Trata, you gave shelter to him, but ikawatan pa ka. So there's no utang na loob there. That is the essence of obvious ungratefulness. He repays your kindness with a crime. So that is what makes the crime aggravated. Kaya puding frameworkers of the revised penal code. Siguro na nakatilaw siguro sila obvious ungratefulness katong sa panahon nila. Anyway, moving on. The crime be committed, ay naipangutana regarding this. Any question? Claro? All right. That the crime be committed in the palace of the chief executive or in his presence or where public authorities are engaged in the discharge of their duties or in a place dedicated to religious worship. Now, if you commit a crime in one of these places, then whatever that crime is will be aggravated and will be held at its maximum. For place of commission to be present, the following requisites must be present: that the offender committed the crime in a place where he was duty bound to respect, and that the offender disregarded the respect due to the said place. So remember ha, the palace of the chief executive is called the Malacanang Palace. So kung dito gi-rape nimo ang isa ka babae sulod sa Malacanang Palace, then you are expect that your penalty will be aggravated to its maximum. What else? Since the new president now is Bongbong Marcos, so wherever he is, and then when you commit a crime in front where he is, then your crime will also be, your crime along with its penalty will be aggravated. Sa pa, kaning places of worship for the church, so for the Christian, for the mosque, for the Muslims. I don't know with the, I am not familiar with the Jewish. Wala po kita Jewish na unsa na place of worship. So please bear in mind, do not commit a crime in places where the president is, or where Malacanang is, or if there is a religious congregation, or else your crime will be set at its maximum. Naipangutana? Wala. Okay. The crime be committed in nighttime, in an uninhabited place, or by a band, whenever such circumstances may facilitate the commission of the offense. Whenever more than 3 armed male factors shall have acted together in the commission of an offense, it shall have been deemed to have been committed by a band. Dili banda na ka ng banda na ka ng music, but band, quadrilla. Anyway, let's start with nighttime. Under the revised penal code, another term for your nighttime is obscuridad. Obscure, when you say covered by darkness. So for nighttime to be present, the following requisites must be availing. First, the offender committed the crime in the darkness or silence of the night. Second, the darkness facilitated the commission of the crime or ensured impunity. When you say impunity, prevent recognition or to secure him against detection or punishment. That the offender intended to capitalize nighttime in committing the crime. And lastly, that the criminal episode must transpire completely at nighttime. So question, what if you committed a crime at night, but the area where you committed such crime was well lit, meaning that nightlight, will the aggravating circumstance of nighttime be appreciated to the accused or not? What do you think?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Yes, really.
It's a yes, sir. It's a yes.
Very good, Mr. Abusejo. Actually, the Supreme Court said that it is not important that the area is well lit. What is important is that you sought darkness or nighttime in order to assure that your offense or crime would be carried out completely. Kaya di ba, at nighttime, tulog man mga tao, wala may awake. So, there is impunity there because you want to make sure that your deeds will be completed, or you will be prevented from detection. Thank you, Mr. Eulosias. Very good answer. Now, second, uninhabited place or despoblado. The crime is committed in an uninhabited place. Second, the uninhabited place facilitated the commission of the crime. And lastly, the offender intended to capitalize uninhabited place in committing the crime. Now, for uninhabited place to be appreciated, dapat yun, kanina area, wala yung mga tao na nakapuyo, completely zero people population, kanang maragod sa ato ayud kanang wala gyud katao-tao gyud ba. That is what you say, that is what you mean by despoblado or uninhabited place. So,
I have a question, sir.
yes, go ahead.
When you say uninhabited place, sir, that's how far or the space between the houses or the location of the crime where it is committed and wait, sir. And for example, sir, I
Mm.
committed a crime in an inhabited place near Kogon or
Mm.
near but the location or the location where I committed a crime is 2 kilometers away from
Mm.
house.
Mm.
Is that let's say 15 meters na lang, sir. 15
Mm.
meters. Is that considered an inhabited place or
No,
not?
not considered as uninhabited place because
My question, sir, is how far is the
far.
distance between yes, sir.
Okay, good question, Mr. Abuseo. Now, it will be based on the facts that you will be presenting as to how nga naman good. Dapat ang uninhabited place should be a place wherein it is unreachable. It is not a place where people most go to at most of the time. So kung kani sila present ni siya, then diyan mo ma-appreciate ang uninhabited place. But if you, let's say, kana na area nimo, ginadauhan ba na siya pero sa mga tao during morning or maski sometimes kanang sa hapon, ana. So ang question ana is, do people pass by here at times? Muna kanang hindi na-discuss yun na siya thoroughly and lisod i-prove ang uninhabited place. Tungod nga, today, in our recent era, wala na kaayoy uninhabited place because most of our areas are already populated. Na-answer ba imong pangutana?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Now, lastly, we have band or quadrilla. So, under kaya mo gitawag sa quadrilla because you need to have at least 4 armed male factors. So the crime must be committed by a band. Band facilitated the commission of a crime or ensured impunity, and the offender intended to capitalize the band in committing the crime. So please don't forget, when you say band, it's quadrilla or at least 4 armed male factors. So what if there are, let's say, 100 individuals, let's say NPA, and there are only 3 armed NPAs? Would you say that is a band or a quadrilla?
No, sir.
Yes, very good, because the law says
The prerequisite is at least 4 armed individual.
yes, 4 armed male factors. Thank you, Mr. Abuseo. All right, moving on. The crime be committed on the occasion of a conflagration, shipwreck, earthquake, epidemic, or other calamity or misfortune. So you committed a crime during an act of God or during a calamity. So the requisites here are the following. The offender committed the crime on occasion of a calamity or misfortune, and that the offender took advantage of the disastrous condition to facilitate the commission of the crime or to ensure impunity. So an example for that is, let's say, di ba, katong Mount Mayon eruption, nanaga ng mga tao. So when the people are fleeing for their lives, you committed a crime during the height of the volcanic eruption. Let's say, nangawat kag mga jewelry sa imong neighbors or whatever, or during the height of a typhoon. Actually, gigamit na ko siya na aggravating circumstance during the pandemic. gibutang na ko dito na during sa kasagsagan sa COVID-19 pandemic, the following individuals willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously committed the crime of cockfighting. Ano ba? Kaya nga naman, tungkol sa pandemic, di ba, people should have stayed in their homes, but because of this pandemic, kanang nanggawas yung mga tao hinuon. So mo na himo na ko siya aggravating circumstance para makatilaw ng mga naga illegal gambling during my last 2 years. Common kayo sa mga information during the COVID-19 pandemic sa mga information when we file cases in the court. I mean, that's just one way of informing you how we apply the provisions of the law. Anyway, moving on. The crime be committed with the aid of armed men or persons who ensure or afford impunity. Now, unsa difference aning aid of armed men from quadrilla? Now, kaning aid of armed men, pwede ni kanang lang sila kabuok ang gagunit og who are armed, pwede duha lang ni sila kabuok. But when it becomes 4, dapat ang aggravating circumstance na nimo is quadrilla. Ano ta ha? The requisites of aid of armed men are the following. Armed men or persons took part in the commission of the crime, directly or indirectly by giving material aid to the principal by direct participation. And lastly, the offender availed themselves of their aid or relied upon them when the crime was committed. So an example is, one commits the crime and then he relies on the armed men behind him to help if necessary. So meaning you are emboldened to commit a crime because naki-back up. But they did not act directly. They are just mere accomplices. In this case, the liability of the principal is aggravated by aid of armed men. Kung nagsalig ka ba, kaya naki-back up nimo, naki-armed men. And moving on, the accused is a recidivist. A recidivist is one who at the time of his trial for one crime shall have been previously convicted by final judgment of another crime embraced in the same title of his code. That the offender has been previously punished by an offense to which the law attaches an equal or greater penalty, or for 2 or more crimes to which it attaches a lighter penalty. Now, these provisions, number 9 and 10, speaks of 4 types of criminal repetition. Kanang criminal yung kay ni sila kay pabalik-balik na ba? Meaning the offender is not committing the crime for the first time. So under the revised penal code, there are 4 types of criminal repetition. You have a recidivist or recidivism, habituality or reiteration, habitual delinquency or multi-recidivism, and quasi-recidivism. Muna sila mga suki sa korte o suki sa BJMP. Now, who is a recidivist? A recidivist is a person who, while on trial for one offense, has been previously convicted by final judgment of another crime embraced within the same title of the penal code. So obviously he is at least a second offender and he must be guilty for the second offense. He has a previous criminal record. He has a previous conviction for another felony. So the previous conviction is not of special law but for the same felony. So may example ani. The best example is convicted ka for physical injuries before and now you are found guilty of homicide. Kaning physical injuries mong good and homicide are found under the same title, which is crimes against persons. So physical injuries and homicide are both crimes against persons. So if you were previously convicted for physical injuries, kinangulata ka sa isa ka tao, and then this time you are found guilty again of homicide for killing another person, then you are considered a recidivist because you were able to um, um, commit these crimes under the same title of the code. It's just not physical. It's not just crimes against persons. For example, crimes against property. Last time you were convicted of qualified theft, and then now you are now convicted of estafa. These two crimes are embraced under the title of crimes against property. So if na-commit mo na duha under the same code or title, then you are considered a recidivist. How about reiteration? A person commits or was convicted before, punished for a crime against property for which he was sentenced to the penalty of reclusion temporal. Now, he is guilty of a crime against persons. So, dili siya embraced under the same title of the penal code because magkalahi man ang crimes against property and crimes against persons. Now, kung kadong bago niya na commit, which is homicide, he was sentenced to prison mayor. Reiteration is present here, or reiteration ang tawag na to sa iya because he was previously punished for an offense which the law attaches a higher penalty. Reclusion temporal manggod is higher kaysa sa prison mayor. A reclusion temporal is just 12 years and 1 day to 20 years, whereas ang imong prison mayor is 6 years and 1 day to 12 years. So, mao na ang reiteration. So, if you were found guilty of two crimes that embraced under the same title, and previously you were convicted of a crime with a very high penalty, that's the reclusion temporal, and then karon sa imong bago na crime na kay let's say prison correctional, which is just 6 years. Okay, klaro ha? Right. In recidivism, all that the law requires is a previous final judgment of conviction. So, para matawag ka na recidivist, dapat na kay conviction. Whereas in reiteration, the law requires that you have been previously punished, not merely convicted. So, reiteration meaning, ang sentensya nimo imo gyung gi-perform. Let's say, 12 years ka sa imuhang sentence, then 12 years po ka na serve sa imong sentence. That is what you call you have been previously punished. Also, other forms of repetition. You have here habitual delinquency and quasi-recidivism. Under habitual delinquency, when a person within the period of 10 years from the date of his release or last conviction of crimes of serious or less serious physical injuries, robbery, theft, estafa, or falsification, is found guilty of any of the said crimes a third time or oftener. Meaning, in the period of 10 years, if you commit another crime of serious physical injuries, robbery, theft, estafa, or falsification, tapos third time or fourth, fifth, sixth na name mo ni, then you are considered as habitual delinquent. So many quasi-recidivism. Any person who shall have commit a felony after having been convicted by final judgment before beginning to serve such sentence or while serving the same shall be punished by the maximum period of the penalty prescribed by law for the new felony. In short, bago lang ka na convict of a crime, pag-serve ni mong sentence, let's say, nakapatay kag inmate ni mo, nakahimo na po kag crime dito sa sulod. Kunya, kaning imuhang crime kay nakaset at maximum period. Sumo na ang quasi-recidivism. Now, let's move on to another aggravating circumstance. That the crime be committed in consideration of a prize, reward, or promise. So the requisites here are the following. That the principal by inducement. When you say principal by inducement, katong tao na nag-induce muha or nag-offer si muha og price or reward para muhimo ka og crime in order to induce another in committing a crime. Then the principal by direct participation, meaning katong individual na siya mismo ang nag-commit sa crime, accepted the offer. Such offer, which was accepted, is the primary factor that induced the principal by direct participation in committing a crime. So this is very common among kaning mga goods for hire, kanang mga for hire nimo ng mga sa imuha. What makes the crime aggravating is the motivating power. Because the best example of that would be the hired assassin. You hire somebody to kill for you. That guy has no grudge against the victim. He does not even know the victim, but because he's willing to commit a felony, that shows perversity on his part. So hired guns, hired killers, guns for hire, mercenaries are best examples. The crime was committed in consideration of a price, reward, or promise. Any questions so far? Pautana? Wala?
Wala pa karon, sir.
Okay, so I'll move on ha. The crime be committed by means of inundation. Inundation means intentional flooding. By means of inundation, fire, poison, explosion, stranding of a vessel, or when you say stranding, giguba nimo, or intentional damage thereto, derailment of a locomotive, derail nimo ang kaning train kay para madisgrasya siya, or by the use of any other artifice involving great waste and ruin. In short, flashy kay ka mag-commit og crime because you want great waste and ruin. What are the requisites? That wasteful means were used by the offender in order to accomplish the criminal purpose. So for example, there is a town below you and there is a dam. So what you did is that intentionally destroyed the dam in order to flood the town to kill its individuals. Aggravating na siya. Used fire in order to commit the crime of murder. Let's say, for example, giset nimo ang kwarto sa imuhang jowa or ex-jowa. Kay gibilin mo kaniya, giset nimo ang iyang room in fire. What else? Explosion. You used a bomb or let's say or any device that would kill several people at a single instance. Stranding of a vessel, gubanin mo ang ship, ang let's say airplane, para madisgrasya sila. What else? Derailment of a locomotive. Gubanin mo ang railings sa train kay para madisgrasya ang mga tao sa sulod. Or by the use of any other artifice involving great waste and ruin. Ang pinaka best example for that is the 9/11 attack. Diba? During the 9/11 attack in 2011, I remember that very well because the summer of that, I was in the Twin Towers. Na ako sa US at that time. And standing ba yun ang Twin Towers ato, and I was very emotional because I was there at the top, and then by September, na kuratan na lang me when we saw on the TV na kaning Twin Towers tiguho na because the Taliban used the airplane to hit the Twin Towers. So muna gitawag na use of any other artifice involving great waste and ruin. So grabe yung mga perversity when it comes to committing the crime. Very common din siya in murder, that the act be committed with evident premeditation. When you premeditate, meaning kanang giplanuhan yun nimo, kanang sample, gusto nimo siya patyon, and you clung into that idea na patyon nimo siya. So, despite niagi ang pila ka minutes, let's say di abot pag days, pero you still cling into that emotion na patyunin mo siya. So that means naging kay plano, naging kay mental state na para patyuning individual na ni. So that's why it's aggravating because you really prepared for it. Now the requisites for evident premeditation are the following: the time when the accused determined to commit the crime. Second, the act manifestly indicating that the accused clung to that determination. And lapse of time between determination and execution sufficient to allow the accused to reflect upon the consequences of his act. Now, very vital yung last one. Because pag namagoy lapse of time, hatagan kasi mo ang huna-huna to reflect. Saman, patyon yun mo siya or dili kay kung patyonin mo siya kay makulong ka. But despite your super ego telling you not to kill this individual, you still clung into that evil intent of yours. So that's why if evident premeditation is present, your homicide is automatically converted to murder. But the problem with evident premeditation is that it is very difficult to prove. Now, according to one author, this is the exact opposite of mitigating circumstance that the crime was committed with passion or obfuscation. Kaya di ba, with passion or obfuscation, gamay lang ang lapse of time. So, mauto, gina-consider sa law na mitigating lang siya kay tungod you were at the height of your emotion. In passion or obfuscation, the offender did not have sufficient time to reflect the commission of the crime. It was more of emotion than reason. It is the other way around when it comes to evident premeditation. You have all the time to reflect, di ba? Magay ka mag-reflection paper, pwede pa ka mag-reflect sa imong kinabuhi. He has all the time to reconsider, but he still proceeded to commit the crime. Despite the careful deliberation, thinking still proceeded to commit the crime. So, it's one of the most difficult to prove evident premeditation. And moving on, we have that craft, fraud, or disguise be employed. Requisites that the offender must have actually taken advantage of craft, fraud, or disguise in order to facilitate the commission of the crime. So a good example of that would be somebody rides a taxi and tells the driver to bring him to this place. Let's say, dalhin mo ako dito sa lugar na ito. And then when they reach the place, the passenger now announces a hold-up and divests the driver of his income at that time or even kills the driver. This is very common among Grab drivers in Manila. The robbery there is definitely aggravated by the use of craft or trickery. The offender, who is actually a robber, pretended to be a paying passenger. He tricked the driver to bring him to a designated spot. If the driver knew his intention, he would not get you as his passenger. So you have here the difference between craft and fraud. So when you say craft, it involves intellectual trickery and cunning on the part of the accused, whereas fraud involves insidious words or machinations used to induce the victim to act in a manner which would enable the offender to carry out his design. Any questions so far? Pangutana? All right, no more. So we will continue on Thursday the remaining aggravating circumstance from 15 down to 21. I will see you on Thursday. Perhaps after discussing 14 to 21, we can start with principals, accomplices, and accessories, so that after that, penalties and the last provisions of the revised penal code na lang ang i-discuss na to. Happy na kita mahuman, guys. Something is na lang and you will be free to enjoy your summer.
Sana sir mag-enjoy.